Did you? You got a solo?
Okay. Curtis or Derek, would one of you mind doing a sound check for us here in the room?
Sounds good and live to me.
Wonderful, thank you.
Right, ready? All right, thank you. All right, good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday, April 13, 2021 Urban City Council meeting. And I'll ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Carberry Montgomery,
Here.
Caduce,
Here.
Obrecht,
Here.
Russell.
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Pogge is absent today. Ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Obrecht, second by Caduce. Discussion, roll call, please. Or
Obrecht?
you had the, I'm sorry, you're going to do roll call, I assume.
Yes, voice vote for this. Obrecht,
Yes.
Caduce,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Item 3 is we have 2 presentations today. First is on the Central Iowa Water Trails. So I'm going to acknowledge Hannah Inman and Nikki Severson and welcome both of you for being here. And I'll turn it over to you to, I know you're going to tag team it, so we'll let you get started and present it how you wish. So,
All right, well, thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here in person and to see everybody again. So hello. We are here to talk about the Central Iowa governance process. And before I do that, I just want to take a step back and remind us all how we got to this point. This project has been part of the city or the region's visioning process for about 3 decades. It really started with David Hurd when he talked about having a golden community, having a great university, having art, and really activating that untapped potential that we had in our waterways. We have the gift of 2 great rivers and numerous tributaries, and how do we engage in those to make the most out of our community? And so out of Capitol Crossroads, the Tomorrow Plan, the Central Iowa Water Trails came about. The MPO did an engineering study and worked with jurisdictions to see what was possible and feasible, and now we are at the point of where we have the Central Iowa Water Trails. We launched an incubator board to get us to this point to be able to tackle fundraising, inclusion, governance, environmental conservation. And so now we are in the part where we're coming to you to talk about the governance process. So many of you know that this is not just a few projects. This is really a vast network. It's over 150 miles of water trails with 86 different sites. Each one of these red dots represents one or a collection of a multitude of sites. So when we look at what are the overall goals and why this is important now and to cities during this time, I think it's good to first overarchingly start to talk about what the overarching goals of the water trails are. First, primarily safety, and certainly there's been 19 deaths on those low head dams since their inception and numerous rescues. But there's a second level of safety, and I'm sure we've all been familiar with this. Paddle sports are the fastest growing segment of outdoor recreation on moving water, and Central Iowa is no different. And with that, we see people needing to access our sites. But however, we're not Colorado with those rocky shorelines. We don't have a way for people to get on and off safely. So we need a holistic way for people to engage in the waterways the way that they want to. Economic development, right now we see about $8.3 billion of direct spending for outdoor recreation in Iowa. And you start to look at those paved bike trails, you start to see what could become of the economic development when it comes to water trails. We did do a study, and once the projects are built out, we could see anywhere from 25 to 50 million in direct spending for Central Iowa water trails. Attracting workforce and tourism, I think that's why we see the business community coming along so strong, and it's even more emphasis in this COVID era. People are finding a great place to live and choosing that place, then finding their employment. And so not having mountains and beaches, we have miles and miles of untapped potential. And again, every survey shows us that that's what potential residents are looking for. And then environmental conservation. I've been working on environmental conservation and water quality issues in Central Iowa for about 15 years. And this project gives us a very unique way to work on that project. All 86 sites have water quality improvements built into them, whether that is wetland restoration, oxbows, stream banks. But in addition to that, we've been able to build partnerships upstream to provide more additional leverage to get more money on the ground within our watershed. So for example, the investment in Central Iowa Water Trails was used by the Agriculture Clean Water Alliance for one of their federal grant programs, which leveraged an additional 20 million of on-the-land water quality for farmers within our watershed. And then outdoor recreation. Again and again, residents tell us that they want more options for outdoor recreation, not only within their backyard, but within the region. So what would be a benefit of a regional entity? First of all, we would provide a cohesive user experience, including signage. We see how this is important on bike trails. It's even more important when you're on the waterways, because you maybe don't know when one jurisdiction ends and another one begins. So being able to have that cohesive user experience, including signage, is key for safety and experience. Additionally, having a consistent long-term maintenance plan that is consistent throughout the region. Regional marketing that holds up everything that is within the communities for people to do, but also to be a player outside of that. That's one of the things that we haven't done as well with our paved trail system. So being able to have a unified regional voice of why someone would want to come to Central Iowa to experience all we have to offer is important. Streamlined communication with the DNR. And then I think on water maintenance, removing those snags, making sure all of our waterways are usable and also available will really help in increasing safety and access. And then, of course, this regional entity, in addition to all of these things, would provide funding back to the jurisdictions for maintenance and their own capital improvements. So what would be the benefit to your residents here in Urbandale? First of all, just with the additional amenities within the city will be an enhanced user experience, but also having those different experiences within a short bike ride or drive or walk, enhancing that quality of life, and increased visitors lead to increased funding for cities. So we'll just walk through the two projects that we have in Urbandale, and I'm just gonna pull up the actual pieces, thank you. With 86 sites, I wanna make sure I get them all right. So this is site 42, if you go to our Water Trails website, and this is located within Walnut Creek Regional Park. It includes an extensive trail network, playgrounds, natural play areas, a basketball court, and a significant prairie restoration near the creek. The outlined improvements complement existing park features and provide opportunities for interacting with the creek by expanding the soft trail network, incorporating interpretive signage, step-down access on both sides of the creek, and respite areas near the water. The proposed improvements benefit numerous user groups, including park visitors, waders, birders, and trail users. The estimated cost of this one is $64,990. And then this one right over there, we'd be able to see it if we looked out. This site is located along North Walnut Creek within one of Urbandale's signature amenities, Walker Johnston Park. Existing park infrastructure includes trails, nature play features, baseball and softball fields, playgrounds, picnic shelters. Proposed improvements are aimed at enhancing the user experience for visitors to Walker Johnston and the Urbandale Library by incorporating into park programming a step-down creek access, interpretive signage, and an outdoor learning space. This estimated cost is $71,216. So I'll let Nikki talk us through the operating structure.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you again for having us here today. My role is that throughout this last year, my company, Isaacson Severson Consulting, has been engaged in helping us get to the point where we're at today and form a new regional entity. So I just want to back up a little bit and tell you how we got where we are now, and then we'll have some time for feedback. So building off the positive momentum of the MPO engineering study, the interim LLC and leadership board was formed to help guide Water Trails through the capital campaign and creating this final structure. At that point, a couple years ago, national parks and recreation experts were engaged just to help determine what is the best long-term operating structure for a system like this. There's nothing like this 150 miles of connected waterways in Iowa or the nation, quite frankly. And so we brought in these experts to conduct interviews, surveys, and small discussion groups with our regional mayors and city managers. And what we really tried to hone in on are what are the values within Central Iowa that we need to uphold when we're creating this, what's worked well in other regional entities, and what could be improved, because we have the opportunity right now to create something from the ground up that works for the entire region, and we want to make sure that we're getting it right from the get-go. So those consultants recommended a nonprofit or conservancy model with public partners, and they really stressed the importance of a public-private funding mix, so there wasn't a sole reliance on one or the other. So at that point, I was engaged, as well as Scott Racker, Urbandale resident, with the Robert D. and Billy Ray Center to take that idea and then put it into practice. And so we conducted individual interviews with regional city managers and our county supervisors last summer. We've had many updates to the Central Iowa Water Trails Executive Committee, the Governance Committee. We conducted a focus group with our private sector. They have been incredibly supportive throughout the capital campaign. I think Hannah told me they're pretty close on the private fundraising total right there. But we wanted to make sure that the private sector would be with us through the long haul, and that we could count on their support as we are looking to the long-term maintenance of the water trails. We've had a number of opportunities to inform our elected officials, and that's one reason why we are here before you today. And we also had facilitated sessions with a working group of regional city managers, supervisors, and others, of which AJ was a part of last fall and early winter. That working group was charged with helping us help come to consensus on two things, which we're going to walk through shortly. First are the organizational documents. What would a 28E look like that would define maintenance standards, operating, and a funding formula that is equitable for everyone in the region? And along with the governance committee of the Central Iowa Water Trails, what would this governing structure look like? So before we dive into the details of what the status is of those two documents, first to take a step back of how this all fits together. As Hannah mentioned, we have 86 amenities for 12 cities and 3 counties. There are the regional sites, 81 of them throughout the region, and they are owned and maintained by each jurisdiction. So those 2 that you saw in Urbandale will be owned and maintained by Urbandale. Then there's the downtown sites. Those are 5 access points in or near downtown Des Moines. That ownership is still being worked out right now, but those vendor contracts and operations will be overseen by the nonprofit. And then we have this nonprofit board that we're in the midst of creating right now, which will oversee that regional network and have a combination of public and private representatives. When we look at the funding, and again, we're going to get into details, this is the high-level picture here. The regional sites, the maintenance is funded by each jurisdiction. So when we're looking at the maintenance in those 2 parks, that would be the responsibility of Urbandale. The downtown sites, before the capital campaign even launched, a business plan was conducted to see, can this make money? Can this be self-sustaining? Is this worth putting all this effort into and raising $100 million? That business model showed that this will be self-sustaining, and then the revenues will go back into investments to the region and to the project. The Water Trails nonprofit will have its own operating budget, which will be funded by jurisdiction support, private support, and then we'll walk through the formula of what that jurisdiction support it looks like and the expectation of our regional cities. So when we brought this working group together last fall, the first thing to do is decide and determine what is the role of this regional entity? What are we asking our partners to do here? So first and foremost, it's making sure we have a cohesive trail network, and that includes design standards, signage, public art, maintenance. Also overseeing our public education and notification for water trails and having one source for that. When is it safe to get in and out of the water? Are the water levels too low or too high? Are they okay in this part of the region, but you might want to stay away on this part of the region? So having one central location for that. Overseeing the marketing and the events, acting as that single point of contact for the DNR that was lifted up through this group and seen as something that'll be very helpful for jurisdictions. And then all of making sure we've got an audit back to our jurisdictions, they're approving the budget, and what Hannah mentioned, which is very, very important, is all on water maintenance, because water flows and we want this entity to take care of that. So the next step then was looking at the organizational document, just general terms. We came to consensus that this will be a perpetual agreement with termination notification due by July 1st and then a 2-year sunset to give the organization time to prepare for a region or a city leaving, but also time for the entity to address any concerns and hopefully keep that city. We came to terms on what is a water trail, what is a water trail project, that all water trail projects are owned by the jurisdiction and therefore liability is covered under the jurisdiction through Iowa code. And that's huge there because that's protecting our cities through Iowa code. Then we're looking at maintenance and standards. Again, when we have visitors, they are coming to the region. They want to have a cohesive spot, and we want to make sure that no matter where you are, if you're getting in at Van Meter, getting out in Pleasant Hill, that everything looks cohesive. So we have a committee that then lifted up to the working group and came to terms on what are the best practices here when it's related to hardscape, landscape, how do we handle flooding? Also an inclusion design tool was created. So that way when we're building these facilities, we're looking at inclusion when it comes to our restrooms, to accessibility, signage, and safety. And so there's some really great tools and recommendations in that Exhibit C. And the emergency response will be addressed through the statewide mutual aid compact and any other local agreements that you have with other cities. And then it comes down to funding, which is a big question, right? So we're going to look at funding in 2 ways. First is the operation and maintenance of the downtown sites and how that impacts the full region, and then the estimated budget for the new entity. So as I mentioned, a pro forma was done. We looked at Ann Arbor, Michigan for our kind of base city because of not what their network is, because ours is going to be much bigger, much broader, but because of the draw of tourism. So we looked at a 4-hour draw. So we're looking there at people from Minneapolis, Omaha, Kansas City, and very, very conservative numbers. What's helped us in being especially confident in these numbers is that Ann Arbor has met their projections all but 1 year. This includes the maintenance and kind of taking care of everything downtown. But then you'll see in year 1, once all of the downtown sites are up and running, of which there are 5, we see a net profit of $23,000, growing exponentially to over $200,000 in year 5. How those are reinvested back into the region. There's a maintenance endowment that will go into, and then also reinvestable gains to go back into the region. And so because downtown will be self-sustaining, will create that revenue, we'll be able to reinvest that throughout the region, taking care of the entity and any other projects that come up. We also asked the Central Iowa Water Trails team to create an estimated budget. You know, when we are bringing cities together, when we were first having our conversations last summer, we weren't sure what would it take to run an entity like this. So we're looking at the first year, which begins July of 2021, at $1.1 million. And staying roughly about the same, but then once everything's put into place, we'll have some opportunities to streamline, and those costs will go down, and you can see that going down a little bit by 2023. Per the recommendation of our initial consultants, we're looking at 70% public funding and 30% private. When we worked with the working group, we wanted to know what factors should we put into play here to make sure that as we're looking at the funding formula, this is equitable and fair for the region. All of our communities are very different. The amenities are different and the waterways are different. So what was landed on is that the funding formula is based on, 25% is based on drainage area, then access points. And what is an update from the working group that we've heard from a number of cities and taken into feedback is that those are weighted access points. So the more navigable your waterway is, the more of a weight you have. So that makes it a little lower actually for Urbandale, and then population at 50%. So how's that come in exactly? For our first year, all of the cities that you see above that 786 line are our cities that have access points that work with the funding formula. So our ask of Urbandale for the first fiscal year is $29,704. Roughly right now. Then you see our cities that are below, and those are our adjacent cities that see the value in being a part of this regional network, even if they don't have an amenity because they don't have the waterways that were identified in the engineering study. So far, Waukee and Norwalk are already a part of that. So then that 10,000 that they will contribute will reduce the fees for the other cities. We just didn't want to count on that because they don't have the cities or have the amenities. What we're working through right now is who's on board and hoping to have the rest of those confirmed by the end of the month so we know exactly where that funding formula will shake out. So our next steps, we are following up with all of the individual jurisdictions. We have just a few more after Urbandale today. We ask that you review the 28E agreements with your legal departments. I think Mayor Andewig will agree that this was done with expert legal advice from the NYMaster firm. Then we're looking to have those 28Es signed. And as I mentioned, we're also hoping to have an indication of, unless anything changes or that a city is leaning yes or no by the end of this month, because we are bringing the working group back together and know that people want to be looking at hard numbers so we can say, yes, everybody is in and here's then how that shakes out. So we will walk through governance and where that's at. But first, I'll pause because I just threw a lot of information at you. Any questions on maintenance, funding, what's in the 28E?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
It's clear that Polk County has been an active party to this. Can you tell me about how involved, I'm especially interested in Dallas County, but Dallas and Warren and how they're seeing their role in this?
Yes, that's a very good question. And you're right, Polk County's been at the table from day one and are very involved. We are still having ongoing conversations with Warren and Dallas counties. The cities within Warren County especially are very supportive. They've had some turnover in their supervisors. So Doug Schull was our main contact and he's no longer on the supervisor board. So we're just walking through that right now and working through to make sure we're answering all their questions. They're comfortable with the capital expenditure as well as the ongoing support. With Dallas County, again, the cities within Dallas County so far have been very supportive, including Waukee, without even having an actual amenity coming on to the regional network. And we are still having conversations with Dallas County, working on that meeting as well. And I think what it really boils down to with Dallas County is the impact it will have on economic development and tying in with their goals there, because their county conservation board has done a lot of projects, but making sure that we can make it all cohesive.
Nikki, is Ankeny the only one that said they're out at this point?
Well, and we're not taking that out as an out yet. But
I know you never take no for an answer. Right?
We are still working on Ankeny, but correct. We have not had a no from any other community at this point.
All right.
And again, what we've been doing is just the last month or so, these types of conversations, letting councils digest. And now knowing that July 1st is coming up quicker, we're starting to say, okay, we're getting to the point where we need to know where everybody's standing and hope to have that by the end of the month.
As you know, I'm on the MPO as well, so I hear a lot of these conversations from the MPO side, and so
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to get to. I know that, you know, the Mayor Lorenz had said that at least he thought Ankeny was out, but I understand that's not a final answer until the council says that too. so.
Right. We have not presented to their council yet.
But I didn't know if any other jurisdiction had even indicated that they, I mean, again, I'm not looking for, I understand we're trying to get everybody in, and that's, but it does make, obviously, it changes the metrics of this if others are out. So I'm just trying to gauge,
It does.
as of today, kind of where we are, if there's been anybody else saying negatively that they would not be wanting to participate.
Not there yet. So Ankeny is probably the one that's been the most vocal on that. There was a communication string with Pleasant Hill where we've answered their questions, and I think
I saw that.
and we might do another follow-up with their council. Then there have been a handful of other cities, as we've had these discussions, saying, yes, but this is a concern. Can you bring that back to the governance committee? And we are addressing those. So for instance, tomorrow we're circling back with West Des Moines on some changes that were made per their recommendation. Same with Clive. Clive wanted, had a concern initially as we walked through governance. Great Outdoors Foundation has a seat on the board, but it was voting. And then we talked about the close relationship to administrative. They said, this really would make more sense and gives us concern as long as GOF isn't voting. So we made that adjustment. Clive is in. So those are sort of the things that we're doing right now, is kind of getting a temperature check and then circling back.
All these changes are uniform changes to the agreement, though. correct?
Yes. And most of them have been with governance,
Yeah.
which is what I get to share with you in a second, but we're getting there. So to answer your question, Ankeny is the biggest outlier right now.
Okay.
Do you feel confident bringing it back to Dallas County, that they're going to be on board?
What do you think on that one?
I think that with the economic development play that's been happening out in Dallas County, there's going to be a big emphasis on trying to make sure that they're at the table for this, but at the same time, we haven't presented, so I'd say either way.
I will say having Waukee and West Des Moines on board, I think is going to help a lot with that, with the outlier counties looking to what their cities are supportive of and wanting to happen, so.
Well, you'll have to see what Urbandale says, but you can add them to the list maybe if we are supportive of Dallas County communities.
That would be very helpful, and hopefully we'll get to take you up on that.
Yeah. I think I'm the only council person in Clive, West Des Moines.
Okay.
And Urbandale that lives in Dallas County. So I take extra attention, I guess, to the activities or lack of activities with Dallas County, so.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and good to know that, too. Any other questions on the maintenance agreement before we
You know
move?
what? Never mind. I'm going to hold. I'll wait until the very end because mine's a little bit more about projects. So
Okay, great, all right.
The question I would have
Yes.
is probably more for AJ. So there'd be 2 locations in Urbandale, and it would be within our jurisdiction. So then we would be tasked with the maintenance. So that sounds like, is that a park and rec? Would they take that on as the maintenance for those 2 sites?
They would. We discussed this during the capital improvements program review, and even though we didn't have a specific dollar amount and location nailed down, it was noted in the minutes that there would be a future request or prepare for a future request for these 2 sites, and in general, in the locations that have been shared with you today. If you, we had the discussion earlier about the 28E agreement with the Urbandale school system, with Valeria School and the recreation field adjacent to the school. And when we had those discussions, we also raised this issue about where would there be an opportunity for the school to join with us from an educational standpoint, and where that location may be in Walker Johnston Park. So kind of a long answer to your question is that the Recreation Commission has already looked at this at kind of a 30,000-foot view And again, it was mentioned in the CIP discussion that without specifics, that at some point for the future, i.e. in the fall of '21, we should look at incorporating for discussion purposes those two locations.
Would we anticipate a great amount of manpower to maintain it each year, or would it
Knowing
require
your,
additional bodies?
yeah.
Our thought at this point is really we build them and they're kind of user-friendly. That, you would have a structure where, as was demonstrated in Walker Johnston, you'd have a structure that would come out from the bank, overlook the stream, maybe have a informational kiosk about, stream life, those type of things. But no, this would be really just kind of self-service, if you will.
Okay,
That
we wouldn't have kayaks that we're renting out or doing any sort of,
it's not navigable,
okay.
except in the most extreme weather conditions.
50 feet downstream would be interesting to kayak.
Yeah.
Fall there.
And that's kind of the beauty of it, when you look at the whole region, is that there really is something for every user every day. And so every day, your residents could take advantage of this. But then there's these other opportunities throughout the region that they can experience that are different. And with yours, it's not as intense for maintenance as well.
Okay, looks like a very exciting project.
We think so. All right, so moving on to where we're at in the governance process. So what I just shared with you, nearly everything came to consensus through the working group. The only thing that was adjusted based on conversations was weighting the access points, which works out well for a number of communities, including Urbandale, that brought yours down a little. What we're working through right now is not firm, but it is getting there. And we are taking feedback from all of our jurisdictions, again, to make sure that we're building this right for everyone. What we know now is that the board will have 3-year terms that are staggered initially. So that way we don't have a whole board rotating off in 3 years. No more than 30 members, and I think we can agree that's probably enough, and that the representation will reflect the funding mix. And this is something we heard in our one-on-one interviews last summer, is that it's really important that if there's public funding and private, that mix of representation is similar. Our jurisdiction representatives will be appointed by the mayor, and our county representatives will be from the Board of Supervisors, and our private reps will be nominated initially by the Central Iowa Water Trails Executive Committee of the LLC board that we have now, and then by the Executive Committee of the newly formed entity. So the board composition, who's making up those no more than 30 members? The way it is written now with feedback from our jurisdictions is 1 representative from every city with an access point plus 2 from Des Moines. And we can go back to that funding formula and their waterways, and that was the rationale there. There will be 1 collective representative from our partner cities. Those are the cities without an access point. So right now it would be either Norwalk or Waukee, and then any of the other communities that come on, and that can change each year. 2 representatives from Polk County. Again, looking at the map, the majority of the regional network is in Polk County, plus 1 from Dallas and Warren. We'll have a Polk County conservation representative, and 7 private representatives that reflect the funding mix, as well as an inclusive collective voice for the Regional Trails Network. And our Great Outdoors Foundation and DNR representatives will be there, but non-voting. Those 7 representatives will be nominated by the executive committee, as I mentioned. Consideration will be given to those who reflect the private funding mix, water trails user groups, diverse communities. Also, what we've heard is where are they working and where are they living? And so making sure that we have a blend of individuals where their residence is throughout, but also where they work, so that those business representatives aren't all representing a business in downtown Des Moines, that we're looking at a matrix which has been created and working into the bylaws here of a blend of all of these representatives, which will be recommended by the executive committee and then approved by the board. The executive committee will be 10 to 12 members, are officers that hold 2-year terms. And what I will reflect here that has been updated is that the officers for the chairs are actually co-chairs. So we'll have a public and a private co-chair. So that way, no matter what, as you know, the chair changes, there's always a public voice. Our committee chairs will be finance, operations and maintenance, inclusion, environmental conservation and safety. And the GOF rep will be there as a voice, but will not hold office. And there will be standing positions by Des Moines and West Des Moines. Given their, I see that look.
I'm listening, I'm listening.
Given their funding and the navigable waters that they have. This was not met without lots of discussion, and the idea that as those waters are flowing, a lot of that responsibility does come on those two communities with the most navigable waters. And we'll come back to discussion on that, don't you worry. So what we're doing right now is making adjustments, as you've heard. And our working group will convene with mayors and city managers on May 6th. And that's when we'd really like to be kind of bringing this home, if you will. Our governance committee is going to finalize the structure. We're working through, again, with legal counsel on forming that new nonprofit. Then appointments will be made by our mayors and boards of supervisors with this new board to begin regular meetings in July 2021. So with that, we'll open it up for questions on governance, projects, anything.
I guess one of the questions for me is Army Corps of Engineers, with Saylorville controlling so much flow, and I don't think they care if it's okay for us to kayak or not. You know, their mandate is basically flood and flood only. What's the conversations with them?
Very close. I'll let you answer that, Hannah.
So the Army Corps has been a major part of the discussions and actually even part of the engineering study. And a lot of some of the things that we're doing along these rivers are part of what they see as crucial for flood control. For example, at the Center Street project, it's just one flashboard system that's very archaic. And so what they're doing is they're updating that flashboard system that will give them greater flood control. So they've been part of these conversations. We're in the process of getting everything permitted for the first 4 projects that will be starting on the Des Moines River at the end of this year. They serve on, I believe, the downtown design committee, and we'll find a permanent place with them within the committee structure because that is so important. But they really are excited about this project, so much so that right before COVID, they actually had a conference here in Des Moines in which we gave Army Corps employees from around the country a tour of what the project is and what it's gonna look like. So they did a project similar to this in California. This fits with one of their new programs that they're trying to roll out nationwide that addresses flood resiliency, environmental sustainability, those types of things. And so it's been a pretty close working relationship so far.
Okay. Do they anticipate changing how they manage Saylorville Lake because of this?
No, and actually when we did the pro forma for the business plan, we took in historic and historic levels and adjusted our pro forma for that. They did make a slight change. I believe it was maybe last year or the year before. Remember, they used to do a steady outflow from Saylorville. They changed it for the first time to make it more reflect what would happen with nature by having more outflow in the spring when things are melting. As opposed to like later in the summer instead of it being consistent the whole time. But our project is built to deal with the flow of the river as how it's been historically. We don't anticipate asking the Corps to change what they're doing, nor would they, based upon our usage.
Okay, thanks.
So our annual basic cost was around 29,000, I think is what you highlighted. But again, what capital cost could we possibly be responsible for then in the future?
So there will be, the only capital cost each jurisdiction is responsible for is within their own jurisdiction. There is no, and this was a very big point that we heard at the very beginning, there will not be an ask from jurisdictions to put into a project in another jurisdiction.
All right, so that's, I just want to be clear on, we're not subject to any liability for any downtown projects for capital costs related to any downtown projects or anything else.
Correct.
Correct.
And then also the idea is that as downtown all is up and running and going well, that, and kind of all those systems are put in place throughout the region, that the costs will decrease. The annual maintenance costs will decrease.
So who is responsible? Is it this public-private entity for the capital costs for the downtown projects?
So the Great Outdoors Foundation is the one that's raising the private funds and then also trying to align the federal and state funds for the project. So as of right now, we've raised just under 25 million for for our private fundraising. The goal is 33.5 million. And then typically projects like this are a third private, a third federal, and a third state and local. So we've received our $25 million federal grant. We are in the process of understanding where this project fits at the federal level with some of the new initiatives that have been rolled out federally, and then starting some of those conversations with state and local jurisdictions. Again, though, there is no expectation that the regional entities would put into the downtown project.
And related to fundraising, that 30% that is budgeted from the private sector, that will be contracted through the Great Outdoors Foundation to fundraise. So as a member of this board, you're not expected to fundraise for that private capital or private fundraising.
Can you tell me what the 5 projects are downtown?
Sure. So we call this the run of the river. So this is really that experience where you would be doing the whitewater rafting and the surfing. So you would drop in at Birdland Marina, go down through Center Street Dam, and that's where some of that whitewater experience is. There will be a smaller whitewater experience down at Scott, and then you would take out at Harriet. And then on the other side, on the Raccoon River at Fleur, it's between like where the Dyko site is and the new Hubble project, as well as Gray's Lake. Right through there, there would be a less intense option to do either some whitewater kayaking or surfing.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
You talked about water quality initially on this. I think that's something that, obviously benefits everybody in the region, but what ongoing focus will there be on overall water quality, and how can we achieve that better quality in the future by virtue of this program?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Again, in addition to what we talked about the, each site having its own water quality initiatives built into it, we've been working a lot with upstream partners in trying to understand how we can fast forward move that needle more quickly. Right now, there's not a lack of trying for water quality within the state. It's been a very siloed attempt. So the conversations that we've been having with the agricultural commodity groups, some of the federal and state departments are how can we align those in a more strategic way, and how can we use things like Central Iowa Water Trails to get that done. So for example, we're embarking on a project, and this is under the Great Outdoors Foundation, this is not under Central Iowa Water Trails, in which we come in as a private partner to put in 200 more saturated buffers. There's already state, federal, and local funding for that, but how can we fast forward that with maybe a small incentive payment to the landowner? There's 200 statewide. This initiative will do 200 within our watershed over the next 5 years. And then also using the investments that we're making to do those matches upstream for other private, making sure that they stay within our watershed. Okay. Additionally, we're having conversations of, or what are some other things that we can do, making it easier for or more simple for a farmer to do this? There's a lot of information, there's a lot of funding, and there's a lot of tools, but it takes a long time to understand them, to go through them and implement them. So working with people like the Iowa soybean, where we create a toolkit of what's available, and then working with local partners, whether it's through the co-ops or something like that, to make the decision a little simpler for farmers to take advantage of some of the existing streams.
And Hannah, can you also speak to how some of the initial costs of the entity are the water monitoring?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that we could understand that the work that we're doing is having an impact. And so some of the initial costs were putting in water monitoring stations to understand where we're at with water quality and how we're improving as we put these in addition to forming some of these pieces of infrastructure to fast forward some of the water quality initiatives that we have upstream.
I think that's critical. I mean, obviously, it's critical for the success of this, but also for the entire region as well. So.
Yeah.
Are there other municipalities in the metro that have projects they're moving forward with the budgeting and planning stage? And can you talk about any of those?
Yeah, so Johnston has put in 2 of their projects. Their third one, I believe, is on the books for next year, I think next year. West Des Moines obviously has done their first 2 projects. Van Meter has done phase 1 of theirs. Clive is looking at moving forward with a couple of their projects. And Polk County has been putting in, they finished one at O'Malley's Park, and they're looking at a couple others at 4 Mile Creek over the next couple years. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
My question's for AJ. Would this be something, I mean, I know we talked about it in the CIP for this year, didn't include anything, but that you would envision, it seems like a relatively small amount that we would be able to prioritize one of the projects to be able to do over the next year or 2?
Certainly, the dollar amount for the projects as they outlined today, comparatively speaking to some of our other projects, are relatively small. And so my initial thought is that they would be obviously in competition with other projects that are funded from the general obligation funding source. So yeah, they would be, we can prepare that for the CIP. Those are the instructions that we received. So having them in there certainly is something we can do. From a construction standpoint, you would probably be looking at sometime in construction season 22, quite honestly, to begin something. You don't have anything planned at this point in time. Then if you'll recall, during our budget review session, I believe we did identify upwards to $30,000 to $35,000 for an annual contribution, with a big question mark behind it because we had not had this type of conversation yet. So we didn't want to catch you guys off guard as far as if you wanted to do something, where would that money come from?
Okay,
I hear
thanks.
Nikki, she's guaranteeing it goes down to 0 eventually.
I did not say that. I know she didn't say that.
Projecting it's going to reduce.
Mr. Mayor, this is Jan Herkey, Director of Parks and Recreation. I just wanted to share as well, and I know that AJ and we've shared it with you, relevant to this, but part of the Barrett Park Natural Playscape, we are looking to potentially introducing something similar like this. So getting park patrons down into the creek and exploring and educational with water. So it's either potentially a third site or maybe instead of at the Walnut Creek Regional Park. But I just wanted to share with you in a quick reminder that we do plan to incorporate something into those plans, either in phase 1, depending how bidding goes, or the future phase.
All right, thanks, Jan. You sound like a voice from heaven coming out of it.
Yeah, my window in the background makes it look bright here.
And so that the Barrett Park would be along the Oxbow, is that right again? Remind me where that is again.
Yeah, it's at the corner of Waterford Road and 156th Street.
Yeah,
So it is a tributary of the Walnut Creek.
right.
So it would be another opportunity very similar to the limestone steps that is proposed in the plan.
Right. Thanks, Jan.
Yep.
All right, any further discussion? So I guess we need to do a little further review internally, and yeah, we'll be talking some more. Appreciate filling us in
Great,
today.
thank you, guys.
So, thanks, guys.
Great to see y'all.
Thank you, it's
Thank
very
you.
informative.
All right, next up on the agenda is a presentation about Central Iowa Shelter and Services. And Melissa O'Neill from CISS is here, so.
Because I know that we're tackling some stuff for you. Yes. Yeah. We appreciate it. Yeah. I'll share that with the council here as well. There's just a high usage of the clients that we serve right now on that waterway. We can actually start with that first one if you want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So every year, we try and make sure that the local cities know a little bit more about the population that we serve at CISS. So I'll go through really quick high level. I've given this to AJ and to the team. Feel free to dive into that more at your own convenience, but I wanted to specifically just share residents from the city of Urbandale. So 2020 was obviously an interesting year for us, and I've honestly couldn't have done it without your help very early on in that first quarter of the year between Urbandale, Clive, West Des Moines. Obviously, none of us knew what COVID-19 was going to bring, and really appreciate the city's help and support in utilizing one of your hotels here in Urbandale as we navigated those uncertain waters. I'm proud to say this team of ours at CISS has been absolutely phenomenal. We've had less than 10 positive tests between our staff and our residents, serving over 2,005 people across the region. So just doing an outstanding job, and the practice worked, the system worked that we put in place with Polk County Emergency Management actually 5 years ago. We always thought it was going to be tuberculosis or hepatitis C that was going to be our outbreak, and it wasn't. It was COVID, but we were prepared, and we knew what to do, and we had a plan. So it was great that we just had to implement, and appreciate the city of Urbandale's help on that. So what you see here is upon entry into our building, we do require what's called an intake. We can have less than 5% null and voids on our intake. That's a HUD regulation we have to follow. So you'll see that known zip codes was 1,801. So they don't have to tell us what their last permanent residence was prior to entering shelter, but it is a part of the intake form. And you can see here, based on that information, 23 individuals from Urbandale used our emergency shelter this last year. This is up from previous years, and I think it has a lot to do with what we saw between the Pilot gas station and the Casey's across the street in Clive. I know the police departments were kind of walking back and forth the street between Clive and Urbandale PD for a little while this summer, and they brought quite a few individuals to us that were really, I think, utilizing more I-80 and I-35, but they did claim Urbandale as their last residence. And so what we do here, just to break it down a little bit further, is if you are interested, you can go to tab F in the future, and you can see specifically by zip code the demographics and the information for people served. There we go. I think you're a little further. I'm going the wrong way. You can see it's a lot. So while I find it here, some other interesting facts. We're still serving the same number of people every year, COVID or not. What we're finding, though, is we're serving fewer or length of stay is shorter. So when I first started 5 years ago, I would have reported to you that our length of stay was over 50 days per person. It's now down to 23. We've had fewer people served in our system overall, and I'll let the Polk County Continuum of Care speak on that. But specific to CISS, our numbers have essentially remained the same. We are serving a harder population. The mental health continues to be a massive issue, as does substance abuse, and I'll share that a little bit more details, what our plans are to overcome that. I promise you're in here. There we go. So predominantly male, 18 individuals came in that were men. What we do is there's actually over 15 different reasons why a person can become homeless. What we do is break that down into 4 categories just to simplify it for everybody. Number one reason overall for the entire community is income or loss of employment. And typically that could be anything from getting laid off from work, not having an SSI or an SSDI income, anything along those lines. For you guys, it happens to be relationships. So relationships are typically a domestic violence. I broke up with somebody, I got kicked out of the house, something along those lines. This isn't uncommon. This is pretty consistent with what we see overall. Once our team peels back the layers of the onion, it's usually a mental health or a substance abuse issue. So just to be clear on that. How do I get back to that other, there it is. So that's kind of the high and low. So I'll just really quick buzz through what we've been working on other than COVID-19. So many of you know in 2017-18, that was the last time we had extreme cold in the state of Iowa, and we had over 40 tent campers out in a water retention basin next to CISS. We are located straight downtown to provide some context to everybody. Number one is our main building on Mulberry Street. That water retention basin happens to be this whole large number 4 area. What we found is because we didn't have site control, we technically couldn't tell them to move. So as much as we kept asking the campers to come inside or move along, they could say no, because technically it wasn't our land and we weren't the owner. So what we did is we worked with the city very quickly. We put it under site control so that we could then ask everybody to come inside or vacate the property. That's kind of that ethical dilemma that we often have, is understanding the larger, bigger picture of our communities, both the tourism and economic development, as well as the social service side of our mission. So we put it under site control right next to our main building, and we began raising money to add 24 additional apartments for chronically homeless individuals in our community. We received the funding award in 2019, and what that did is it actually forced our board to sit here and say, wow, we need to actually have a strategic plan, right? Because we're not seeing anyone else really tackle the chronically homeless. These are the individuals, like I mentioned, sleeping around our rivers, under our bridges, and these are people with multiple evictions on their record, the hardest of the hard, with the major mental health and substance abuse to boot. So we are actually in the process, scheduled to be on track. Bob, I know you helped us a little bit with that, create that nice property line right down the middle. We have 8/24, August 24th, we'll be fully completed with the project. We'll finish our occupancy and we'll begin moving people in. There are only 12 people left on the chronically homeless list. So while we've raised the money to build the housing, our team has absolutely obliterated the list, and it'll be officially with CISS done. We will have checked that box. Just like ending veterans homelessness, we will have ended chronic homelessness, which means we're housing people faster than they come into the system. Okay? Chronic homelessness is a HUD definition that you've been living on the streets for 1 or more years. Okay, so we'll be pulling everyone off that list. There might be a few outliers that we aren't aware of, but for the most part, anyone that we are aware of will be housed. So it didn't stop there. So the board and I sat down and we started having this fun conversation, this chicken and egg. Do we do a strategic plan first, or do we do this real estate feasibility study on all the land around our property? Like, what do we do with this 4 acres? And so the board decided to do a real estate feasibility study first. We hired Shift Collective. Shift is a neighbor of ours. They're actually right up here in this fun building. And they put together what you see in front of you, and I'll give you a hard copy, AJ, and then an electronic copy for anybody that's interested. What should we do in downtown Des Moines and Mulberry Street on all the vacant property around us? So just to provide a little more context, I'm gonna start at the top here. This little pink building, this is empty. This is the Lizowitz building. Across the street, vacant lot owned by Keck. Number 6, and this blue one here, vacant lot owned by Nationwide. D-Mark is moving. They are for sale. So again, a vacant lot. This is a building that essentially just needs to be torn down and started over. Nothing here, number 4. And then this is a piece of property owned by the city of Des Moines that they know I have my eyes on as well. So what we decided to do with the information and the feedback is we actually put out a lot of surveys. We wanted to hear what our neighborhood had to say, but the neighborhood was only one small part of that feedback. We wanted to hear from our clients, and we wanted to create a circle feedback loop for our community. So Mayor, you mentioned the Homeless Coordinating Council. Well, that was formed back in 2012 when our main building was being built by Jim County and Bill Knapp. because the team had tried to move it to Keogh Way and the community had an uproar because they didn't get the feedback from stakeholders about what this location should really be. So from the beginning in the study, we've said, hey, we need to get this information out to everybody and we need to get your feedback. So we had over 250 surveys from everything from small business to big business to neighborhoods to municipalities to county supervisors to state officials. And we said, what should we do with all this land? So the results of this was only about 10% CISS. The rest of the results were from the community. So in the larger book that I'll drop off, it's about 90 pages. It includes all of the survey results and all of the feasibility studies and who was included and who wasn't, basically. We had 12 separate groups. So in all this, the energy started to form, and there were some projects that started to get going well before the results were revealed and before our board even had a chance to do the strategic plan. One of those happened to be an agri-neighborhood. So the idea kept coming up, we need more usable space for people who are living in downtown Des Moines to go. But we didn't want it to be just another park. COVID-19 was hitting, we had a whole bunch of social unrest, and all of a sudden food insecurity really started to pick up. We started to do more programs with local restaurants. They started to serve at our meal sites, which took a burden off us because we obviously didn't have as many staff members and we were stretched thin. So we hired restaurants to serve at our parks, but it continued to highlight this growing need for food. And so Confluence, another neighbor of ours up here by Meredith Corp., Confluence actually came to me and said, hey, what if we did this? And so we went out, maybe drew some things up on a bar napkin, and found that we were gonna build and expand on our greenhouse. So we currently have a 750 square foot greenhouse. This is a 3,900 square foot greenhouse that will grow 12,000 pounds of tilapia and 200,000 heads of lettuce annually. We've already done the math that shows 60% of the food will go directly into our community kitchen, into the meal sites around City of Des Moines Parks and Rec, and anywhere essentially that there's what's called a summer meal meetups program, which we're still taking names. If you have any low to moderate income, we're still drawing straws for our sites this next year. Did you say tilapia? Tilapia. 12,000 pounds, yep. We have our second interview this week for our Director of Agriculture to actually run this program in the full agri-hood. The Don, Shane, and Maddie Shane, the Shane family actually were the lead donors and gift on this particular project. We have 310,000 currently secured and another 120, 130,000 still out there pending. This all depends on city code. Believe it or not, it is a fish tank, but they still want sprinklers. So, and we're right next to the fire station. These guys are our neighbor and they still want a fire hydrant. So that's my little poke in there for all the city planning and zoning people. So we have determined 60% of the food is all we really need. But as we've started to talk about this more and more, we didn't realize our refugee community was actually heading to Minneapolis to bootleg whole fish tilapia back to central Iowa. That and Panora. As soon as, that's a major gap in our fresh food market, so we didn't know that. And they've already plugged in and said, hey, like, let us know every time you have a batch, we'll buy. So we're already kind of back and forth with local supermarkets and our refugee community in particular to help meet this need. And these are fish that we will sell. So tilapia sells for roughly $14.99 a pound retail. The heads of lettuce are 100% aquaponic and organic. They sell for roughly $2.91 for a head of lettuce. We would sell them at 91 cents. That's wholesale. So all the revenue from this goes directly back into putting people back to work in our emergency shelter. So you hear us oftentimes put about a roof over people's head and helping take care of that basic need, but we really want to help move people towards self-sufficiency. And so their goal is actually to learn not only some additional skills using a high demand industry like the greenhouse, but to help them pay their own way, help them become taxpayers again in our society today and get people back to work. Again, number one reason why someone becomes homeless, loss of income and employment. Let's get them back to work and create a system that allows that to take place. So they work 4 hours a day. There'll be 20 people on staff on a regular basis. Currently there's 8. Their number one goal is housing. And if we can help them get a job outside of that and sustain, by all means. This happens to be roughly 25 acres and one 3,900 square foot building. And so we know that these are beginning to pop up more and more across the state of Iowa. We've watched the Cleveland Green City growers pretty close, and our team is actually heading down to Houston, Texas, to something called Sustainable Harvesters, which follows a project that's like an ESOP. So it puts low to moderate income workers back to work in a greenhouse to battle food insecurity and get people training and careers that they wouldn't normally have. So the greenhouse is the marquee to the larger complete agri neighborhood. And so this goes back to that fun little bar napkin conversation. So I'm always late for meetings, and I just happened to be late, and Matt had the only seat left next to him, so I had to take it. And we started to talk about the challenges we were faced in 2020. And what was interesting about this particular project is he happened to be going on a fishing trip with some guys that ran a pontoon boat company and a dock company. And they said, actually, the technology already exists. So those that know our area, this is a water retention basin. And the one thing they don't make any more of is land. So we said, how can we use technology from other industries to battle food insecurity? So when I show you this picture, I wanted to make sure I highlighted the affordable housing units that are around us. So Exile Brewing is down here on the corner. These two buildings here are affordable housing. These are called the Crane Apartments. They're 60% of average median income. That is considered affordable. You have the Flux, which was being built at the time of this photo. Flux is actually considered luxury housing. What's interesting is we actually have 2 employees that live at the Flux. Doesn't mean I pay that much. They live there and 2 volunteers that come from there. So we say about 20% of the people living there actually work or invest at the shelter across the street. We also know that Hubble is building right here, and there's a photo that I showed earlier that has a bridge. The bridge no longer turns to the right towards Hubble. It might just happen to turn to the left now towards a soccer stadium. So we happen to have quite a bit of support from our downtown community, and it's really for us all about one thing, feeding people. If we can feed people, and if you're hungry, you come and get it. If you have a meeting downtown Des Moines and you get a call from your significant other saying, hey, can you pick up some veggies, and you forget, just swing by, grab them. It's all good, free to everybody. That's the point. And so to battle food insecurity, we had to look at it differently. We know there's a study from Harvard Social Work for West Des Moines and Des Moines in particular that shows that most of the people living downtown Des Moines are what's called rent burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. Those that have a vehicle or health insurance or other things or childcare, they're continuing to put on the edge of how am I going to feed my family? The reason why we started our community kitchen program to begin with is we didn't want parents to have to pick between paying rent and putting food on the table. Once this story came out and we realized that a lot of our downtown community was struggling with this, we had to find some creative ways to solve this problem. So you can come down and get food for free, no question asked. We just ask maybe you pick a couple of weeds while you're at it, right? Help us to maintain the grounds. So we worked with Trees Forever. We're gonna be planting 42, guys get it right, 42 different varieties of fruit and nut trees this spring. And again, we took a look at our immigrant community and what the gaps were, as well as our downtown community. We also took a look at the variety of the trees that we're planting in here so that we would have early summer apples, midsummer apples, late summer apples, same thing with peaches, plums, pears, nectarines, you name it. So it's all included in this. The floating docks are amazing. How this works essentially is if this thing ever floods, they just rise up, it keeps the vegetables and foods just like a pontoon boat, clear of everything, water goes down, it goes back down. In my time here at SIS, the last 5 years, I've seen it flood 3 times, maybe for an hour. But either way, we still need to find an innovative way to protect that produce. The property is 100% fenced in. We unlock it in the morning with those trainees and we lock it at night. We ask everybody to vacate just like a European garden. To maintain the overall integrity of the space, it'll continue to have lighting and other security features as well. But we needed to make sure that we eliminated that the best we could because we knew it would be a problem. It also includes a dog park. That was a request that happened in that real estate feasibility study, and art pieces. So the 5 art pieces will really be there to tell the story of CISS. We want people to know how we started in 1992. We're gonna be celebrating our 30-year anniversary, so we wanna create those benchmarks along the way. Where it gets more interesting is our board, after the agri-hood and the greenhouse, have asked, we had it down to 2 different projects. What's called the Social Impact Center, which came out of the study. The second one, which is all about coming together, humbling ourselves to solve really, really hard problems like homelessness and food insecurity in our community. The second one was a project called Haven House, and this is the one I'd like to speak most to you guys about today and get your feedback on. I know you and I, AJ, have had some conversations in the past on this, but it really tackles back to substance abuse and mental health. In particular, we know from our clients in specific, they really struggle right now with the substance abuse and where they are to go. There are 3 options. Your law enforcement can drop people off at the hospital, the jail, or the shelter. And if we can't handle them at the shelter, where do they end up? the jail, or the ER. And so what we said is we had to start creating a different intermediary where we don't associate with what's called the crimes of homelessness. Sobering isn't something you just go and sleep off. It's a complete journey. And so as a part of this project, we hired BizLab. I don't know if you guys know Steve Whitty and Carlos and Jeff or done any work with them, but they conducted a program feasibility study for us. They contacted people from around the globe, specifically Amsterdam, Luxembourg are two of the hotspots, as well as closer to home in San Antonio, in Omaha, and Los Angeles to learn a little bit more about what other people were doing to tackle this issue. We know the Polk County supervisors have been working on this topic for 10 years. And so while I'm not asking for any commitment at all from Urbandale today, I do think it's important to highlight that the Polk County supervisors now have to make a decision. They've got two options. Broadlawns, I understand, is back at the table, and I know the city of Des Moines and Polk County are trying to work out the details. So I'm presenting to you the concept, and then they have 17 days to make a decision. And I'll get to what that means in a minute. So this particular project, this is what it looks like. One of the things we found is typically these facilities, sober living, detox, are typically done in a basement somewhere, hidden, out of sight. We wanted to actually create more of a professional setting. The first floor is designed exactly like a hospital. In fact, Broadlawns and Unity Point actually helped design that first floor to make sure it met their needs. And then the police department and fire department had an active role in this as well because we knew that they would be called upon quite often to serve here. The location, just for proximity, directly across from CISS and Fire Station 1. Now, I will say it will shift over here to the left a little bit more. We're in negotiations with Nationwide Commercial Real Estate for this particular piece of property, and they want us to shift it to the left. So we're going to finalize that piece, hopefully again in that next 17 days. They are also on the clock. The space includes 6 sobering beds, 10 detox beds. Detox beds are actually reimbursable by Medicaid and Medicare, and so this is the thing that funds the entire first floor project. I'm only sharing with this for you guys for context because this is essentially another location where we would be able to work with your law enforcement to bring somebody. And then once they hit a point here where they're sobering up, they can come across the street to CISS and stay with us. Or if need be, we can return them back to their main location. The intent is that they start that journey, right? And so it's not about a one-stop shop, but a process. This is also the front of the house is run by Prelude and by Employees and Families Resource. So there's 4 separate organizations that run that first floor. CISS essentially just owns the building and creates the space for it to take place. Now, feedback from our clients in our community was obviously we need more affordable housing. And I'm not just talking about affordable housing for the people we serve, but for our entire community. And I'll use that study from Harvard University again. So these are 700 square foot, 1-bedroom apartments. The intent is sober living. So while we still follow the housing first, the feedback specifically from our clients and those that were part of the BizLab program study is their biggest struggle is to find an affordable place to live that reduces the temptations to use. And so we took that into context and got more information, and this is a part of the work that BizLab's doing, on activities of sober living. And so while the apartments are 700 square foot and there is a lot of shared space, it includes an art room, music therapy, a greenhouse, its own small food pantry and clothing closet. But we wanted to create an all-inclusive spot that if you were being tempted to go and use again, that you actually have an alternative place. Hey, go bang the drums or play the piano or go paint a picture. Or if you're into gardening, come over to the greenhouse or we'll put one up on the 3rd floor. But we had to start creating some other spaces for people. And that was all in that real estate feasibility study. So I just want to remind, this is not what CISS is saying. This is what the community is asking for. We just had Shift put it all together into a nice little package for us. The same thing replicates. This is some pictures and examples from Los Angeles' sobering center. You have to take into consideration lower beds to reduce the risk. In the Iowa City, this is Crosspake. This is actually the first person to receive the National Housing Trust Fund Award. This is pictures from their facility that's been up and running, and it's all about chronic homelessness and sober living as well. So we took some lessons from our friends at Iowa City, and then a nice studio apartment out of New York. This is also one of their affordable housing units. So you can see this is not your typical location where you would see affordable housing. This looks just like anything you and I would have. So highlighting it back and forth, there's a lot that has to take place still. We're currently obviously working on the greenhouse and the agri-hood. That deadline, our funding opens on April 30th. I call this our Ice Bucket Challenge. We have a lot of funding coming through the American Recovery Act. CISS is one of 3 organizations across the state that's eligible for up to $50 million in veterans affordable housing. We are right on the docket with the state of Iowa for $31 million. They're looking for shovel-ready projects in affordable housing. They've called us, they've asked us if we're interested, if we'd be willing to apply. And on April 30th, the notice of funds availability for the next round of National Housing Trust Fund opens up, which is anywhere from 2.7 to 4.7. We'll get the final number in a couple of weeks. So the layer of funding to build the thing is there. I want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our entire community, not just in Des Moines, knowing that we serve a lot of the residents from Urbandale in our emergency shelter, and we look very closely with law enforcement here, whether it be our street outreach program or serving in our shelter. So that's kind of the high level of everything that's happening down around CISS that may affect the city of Urbandale, and just open for comment and feedback at this time. So not much going on. Nothing happening.
Business as usual.
Actually, I have a sign in my office that says business as usual, because honestly, we didn't skip a beat. I mean, we had the processes in place, we had the plan in place. This actually started in October of 2019, before COVID happened. It was actually a blessing of COVID because all of a sudden everybody was home and you were all available on Zoom meetings. So all of a sudden we got way more information and feedback than we ever anticipated. And so while this was supposed to be done before COVID started, it was just a series of events that at first we were mad about, but now we're like, captive audience, this is great. So, yeah.
Well, I think this is just really, really innovative. I mean, it sounds like nationally, but I think especially for us here in Central Iowa, I'm very excited to see how we can help out and to watch the progress for our whole area as you guys move forward with this.
Thank you. Yeah, honestly, this, when we thought about it, it was more about kind of that college campus, right? How do we create a campus to solve so many of these problems that we have in our community today? And I was joking a little bit about the water trails, but I'm actually very serious. If you haven't been down that water trail lately, it's not good. There at one point in time during that extreme cold, there were 90 people sleeping on that water trail. So what we did is we pivoted again, and we started a street outreach program. So we hired a licensed social worker to work directly with the city of Des Moines, with law enforcement, with DART, with the library, with the Skywalk Association, because we had to find other ways to solve this. If we couldn't convince people to come inside because they were required to wear a mask, we had to go out to them. And so we are working very diligently to help clean up those waterways, knowing the economic and tourist impact that it would have on our community if that looked like Skid Row the way it does right now. It's pretty awful if you haven't driven down there recently.
Melissa, last time I was down at the shelter, there were education classes going on. I think computer labs, GED. Speak a little bit to that, what's going on.
Well, so 2020, that stopped. Nobody wanted to come in our building. It was really funny. We found out who our real friends were in the nonprofit community really quick. We are opening all that back up, and we're trying to convince people to come back. Facebook actually gave us in 2020 all new laptops, and so the computer lab will be fully functional again once number 2 is done, because right now they're using the computer lab and having to do some renovation on the computer lab to make the addition work. That computer lab will be back fully functional. We've hired, starting May 1st, our new Hope Wing coordinator will be back. And their job is to coordinate all of the classes, the training and development for all 3 job training programs. And even for those who don't want to work for us, but they want to go find workforce somewhere else, their job is to coordinate that. One of the highlights of 2021 so far is we've been designated by HUD as an Envision Center. We're the only one in the state of Iowa designated by HUD as an Envision Center. Makes us eligible for a nice little, we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. There are 100 of us across the country, and there were $600 million given to Envision Centers by the American Recovery Act. We don't know what all the strings are attached to that, and we don't know what our allocation will be yet, but we are one of those. It includes, to your point, the job training. It includes helping people get back to work, the workforce development side. There's a specific component that's attached to any of our federal dollars over 200,000, something called Section 3. I don't know if you are familiar with Section 3. It's a fun little regulation, is what I understand, that dates all the way back to Ronald Reagan, that says if you receive X number of dollars, you are required to hire people of low to moderate income workers. What's interesting is because of our job training program, because of our designation, we make it really simple for general contractors because they can simply just contract with us and we'll take care of it for them. So it meets all those needs of getting people back to work and employers finding people to work. Yep.
And then homeless women are, present an additional challenge, as I understand it. I work a little bit with Hope Ministries, and they're in the process of raising funds to build housing for women with small children. And as I understand it, can they come to your shelter if they have small children with?
No. So currently, we are the only shelter in the state that allows just women to come. We only do women over the age of 18. The downside right now, and this is where I appreciate so much of what Hope does. In fact, they're actually going to be attending our Heroes for the Homeless event. Because we really want to demonstrate to the community the importance of our relationship with them. There's things that they can do that I can't do and vice versa. Women with children is one of them. Even men with children, I think that that's often overlooked. If a man or a woman comes to our building and there's no room in our family shelters, the kids go to youth emergency shelter services and the adults stay with us, creating secondary traumas for that family. I mean, think about it yourself. My husband and I have talked about this. He said, Melissa, if anything ever happens to us, we're sleeping in the truck as long as we can. We're not splitting up our family. And I completely respect that and understand that. But there is a major gap there. And I really appreciate, I know what Leon's doing in helping to create that space because there is no alternative. And we struggle getting people into domestic violence as well. So we become your overflow for your DV shelters as well. We have found more 16, 17-year-olds trying to check into our building. Usually they can stay for a few days. But once that intake happens and we realize they're over the age of 18, we have to vacate them as quickly as we can. And right now, the only way for us to do that is to call law enforcement and have them court order to youth emergency shelter and services. So it is a dance, unfortunately. It's the importance of our systems and our partners working together. Well, I appreciate all your time, and I promise I will be back at some point with a formal ask, but it will start with the Polk County supervisors making their decision. And I know the city of Des Moines is nudging them that they have to lock in their decision because this is going to be, we're going to answer it for you or you'll have to go in another direction. Alternatives, just so you know, for that first floor, we've been entertaining a veterans group out of Simi Valley, California for the last 2 years. It's a part of this real estate study as well. The veteran group focuses on PTSD. They've got a pretty controversial therapy going through the FDA right now out of their Philadelphia clinic that will not be a part of our location to start with, but if it does pass, it will be. They built their second location in San Francisco. They're looking at Des Moines Metro for their third. It would be a regional facility, but that first floor is solely dedicated to supporting veterans with PTSD, substance abuse, and sobriety. As you know, we're continuing to add more veterans apartments to our list of available options, but that is a major gap as well. So that is our second option, depending on what the county says, and that's in part because of the funding that we know we have coming down through the Recovery Act.
Melissa, can you clarify when you say the county has 19 days, what exactly do they have to decide?
I have my NOFA opens for funding, and we need to know what was going in on that first floor.
So that you need to know if they're going to partner?
If they're going to go with us or Broadlands.
Okay.
But they don't, I'll let them work out those details. Yep. So that's the deadline. It's just a matter of, I need to know which direction I'm going with which funding stream. And they open on April 30th.
And you are ready to go?
I'm ready to go. You can see it. We've got the feasibility study done. We've got the site plan. We've got the layer of funding. I know we can fund it. It's not even a question. This project costs right now $9.2 million, and we've got a stack of funding that's no problem, no sweat. It's just a matter of where does Polk County want to be in the solution to the process. Well, I know you have all these. Happy to answer any questions if you look at that data anymore. And the last thing, just thank you all for your time. 2020 was a challenge we know for all of us, but working with the city of Urbandale and Clive and West Des Moines really early on made it a lot smoother. I know that we were all a little bit on eggshells, but knowing that the hotels were a great option and working with your police chief was outstanding. And I know we had some fun stories that we left with that experience. But I know we couldn't have done it without you. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks, Melissa.
Yep.
All right, we're beyond our hour, so is there anything else for the good of the order right now? If not,
I'll just say that, like we talked about, the NFC had their house party with the library last night. Bob sat in on it. It was incredibly successful from my vantage point. They had quite a number of residents or potential residents of Urbandale on board. It was also a great collaboration between Neighborhood Finance Corporation, Home Inc., Habitat for Humanity, Restore. So I'm looking for dividends to come out of that event. And it was just really great to have the library, Tana taking the lead on that. So I was very pleased with how that went.
absolutely. All right, is there a motion and a second to adjourn?
Motion made.
By Russell, second by Obrecht. All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.